Hi, my name's Ian Kinder. I'm with Live Safe Academy, and I'm here talking with one of the few men that I call teacher, and that is with Joseph Little Joe Ferrera. Now, Joe Ferrera has an extensive background both as a city police officer, where he worked in the Detroit, Michigan area, but he also started his career and is currently working as a deputy. And he's also somebody who was a part of his department's SWAT team and was actually in charge of his SWAT team. And he's also somebody who now works as a subject expert. And he has a really extensive background in topics that are absolutely critical, not only for people's safety, but also for their ability to protect themselves in the legal system. And so, Joe, I'd like to introduce you here. I want to thank you for giving your time. You can talk a little bit about your background and then talk about what we're going to cover in this upcoming class with you and why it's so critical that people understand the topics that we're going to cover in the class, both for their safety and also for their legal protection on the civil side and on the criminal side.
Well, thank you, Ian. It's great to be with you and your viewers. I came on the job in 1977. I worked for a federal agency for a couple of years, and I saw that the sheriff's department near me was hiring deputies, and it paid quite a bit more than I was making. So I decided to jump ship and become a deputy. I did that for 6 years and spent most of that time in corrections, which was a very eye-opening experience. Corrections officers have a very tough job in this country, whether it's a local corrections officer or a state or federal corrections officer. It's tough to be locked up with bad guys all day long. From there, I went to a city department, as you stated, that bordered Detroit on the north side, the northwest corner. And I did spend almost 30 years there. That's really where I got into training. I had already had a background in martial arts. I had been training in martial arts since 1970 and continue on to this day. And but I expanded into law enforcement, use of force training, professional use of force training, which is very different. I was very lucky in 1985, not only to get hired by a city department that was a great department where I had so much opportunity to work undercover. I worked in surveillance. I worked as a field training officer. I was the lead use of force instructor for the department for the last 18 years I was there out of almost 30 years. Oversaw all the hands-on training and a lot of the firearms training also. Was a team leader. I was never really in charge of the SWAT team, but I was the team leader for many years, and then the team trainer for many more years after that. As you know, I have well over 4,000 hours of instructor schools in both firearms, subject control, defensive tactics, taser, pepper spray, baton, pretty much use of force, with a minor background in field training. As a field training officer, I went to several schools to learn how to teach task-specific adult learners, and then also a background in terrorism. I've been to several instructor programs on how to teach terrorism issues to patrol officers. I retired from that department and immediately went back to work for the sheriff's department, starting first in the courts as a court deputy, but eventually I was kidnapped out of the court unit and assigned to training because my passion and my background is in training. For the viewers watching, that resume fits a lot of people that are already out there doing a lot of good training, and there's a lot of good training out there. But for them to understand, 1985, I met a gentleman by the name of Bruce Zuckel, who at the time was teaching me physical skills from his program called Pressure Point Control Tactics, or PPCT. But Bruce has also had a little known company where he's done human factors research. And the current company, parent company, is called Human Factors Science. And we look specifically at how the human brain and body work together under high levels of stress and how people perform under those high levels of stress. And that's going to be the topic for our 3-part mini-series on survival stress and human factors and human performance, if you will. And that's the key. What many people go through is a physical skill set, not unlike training at a traditional martial arts school or dojo, and learning how to throw people or how to control people, depending on the style of martial art it is, or in a trauma-based system, how to hit people. I've met more than one person who had a black belt in martial arts who went out and got their butt handed to them when they got into a real confrontation, because in fact, they had never been in a real fight. Yes, they had put on all the gear, and yes, they had made some contact in the dojo, but all dojos are static, safe environments. There are rules. We can't hurt each other. You can't eye gouge. You can't choke people. You can't punch people in the throat or kick them in the groin. There's rules, because if we hurt each other in training, nobody's going to want to train anymore, or God forbid, nobody would be able to train anymore. It's not unlike the fact that I have done a little bit, skoshi, as they say in Japanese. I have done a little bit of expert witness work over the years, not by choice. I've always been contacted by an outside agency or a lawyer and asked to work as an expert. And in federal court under oath, I've given my opinion that what we do in firearms training, i.e. standing in front of a paper target, punching holes at this distance or that distance or that distance, maybe with a flashlight in our hand, maybe not. That type of firearms training, no matter who you are, law enforcement, security, the everyday citizen with a concealed pistol permit, or the everyday citizen carrying a gun on their own property to defend themselves, no matter who you are, my opinion, punching holes in that piece of paper once or twice a year, or the agency that I work for, we make our people shoot every month. And we have an awesome firearms program. But just punching holes in that piece of paper is about, in my opinion, about 10% of what you need to know to survive an actual shootout or a knockdown, drag out fight or a knife fight, because all you have, maybe where you live or work, you can't take a gun, so you carry a pocket knife. That type of survival stress, your brain actually realizing that if I lose this fight, I could be crippled for the rest of my life or dead. When that happens, the physiology of the human body, the brain function, the body functions all change. And we don't cover enough of that human factor or that human performance when we do training. Now, I'm not saying some people don't. Some of you watching right now go, wow, you know, I train at this private range, and the instructor that teaches us is trained by the same company. It's trained by Human Factors Science. They're PPCT people. I've learned all this stuff. Cool, that's awesome. But I'm willing to go out on a limb here in my obese state from our COVID isolation and say that most people listening right now are like, what are you talking about? I know what the latest and greatest ammunition is. I've got the latest, greatest expensive handgun. I put this super cool laser sight on my gun. I put this red dot sight on my gun. I've got all the bells and whistles. But see, where the failure occurs is the operator. And that's why special people, SWAT teams, special operations in the military, special operations in the private security field. What are they doing constantly? They're doing training, and not just punching holes in a piece of paper. They're doing stress inoculation training. They're doing types of training that help them perform better under stress by exposing them to the stress as close as we can come to it before the poop hits the fan. So before things go south, we want to inoculate them into the stress of the event so that they won't over or underreact both problems in that arena. Overreacting, using force on somebody, whether you kick them, whether you pepper spray them, whether you tase them, stab them, or God forbid, whether you shoot them, using that level of force on somebody that it's not justified on, or at the bad end for you, underperforming, underutilizing enough force, and now you get seriously injured or killed, or other innocent people around you, whether you love them or you don't, whether you're trying to defend somebody you care about or just a perfect stranger from evil, you underperform, and now a good guy gets hurt. So we don't want an overreaction, which can lead to you going to prison for the rest of your life, and we don't want an underreaction where you end up dying or you or somebody else gets seriously injured. And, you know, when we look at that, you know, we're basically talking about, you know, defining human performance, defining survival stress, defining proper training methods for dealing with survival stress, and defining what triggers survival stress. And all those things would be covered in our 3-part series on, human performance, survival stress, and human performance under stress. So there's so many factors that we have to look at for proper training that goes way beyond punching holes in a piece of paper.
Well, and I would say too that, you can see people that look really great in the training environment, then they get into real situations and all of a sudden they don't look so good anymore. And that's because of this difference, this separation of the training environment and the real world environment, and how dangerous that false validation in the training environment can be. And I think you and I know, because, we know a lot of people that like to shoot. We like to shoot too. And they'll go to the range and they'll go, oh, look at my groups on this piece of paper. I'm so good at this, man. If anybody tries to hurt me, I've got this laser precision, right? Yeah, but that's because you're in a fully lit room. You're taking your time. There's no stress involved. And as Bruce Lee said so famously, boards don't hit back. That piece of paper is just standing there or hanging there waiting for you to shoot it. It's not actually doing anything to you that you have to react to. And, one thing I'd like to mention is that this is not just a workshop for shooters, for people who have guns for self-defense, for law enforcement, for people in the military, for people in private security, but this is also for martial artists. This is for anybody who really, truly wants to bridge the gap from what they're doing in training to what they're going to have to do in a real situation. And that brings me to another question, Joe, because I'll tell you, I was very skeptical of this live virtual format when we started doing this training, because my background as a trainer goes to 1990 is with in-person training. So I really didn't know how much value we can bring to the Zoom format. And as a result of doing the Zoom format, because of COVID and the lockdowns and everything else, I've really been amazed and very happy with, and the students have been very happy with, the amount of value that we can bring to them in this kind of interactive format. And I've had the blessing to train with you many times around the country, as far away as Utah. And I can tell you that everything you're going to present in this workshop, it's really going to be no different whether we're sitting in the same room or we're doing it in the Zoom format. So I know you have a little bit of experience with this interactive live format. Can you talk a little bit to people that might be skeptical about this format of training and getting the full value of what they want to learn from this type of a live virtual format?
Sure, and that's a good point because, me, I'm an old guy. I came on the job in 77. And everything was face-to-face, hands-on, nose-to-nose, toes-to-toes. First, I want to address the fact that you're right. This isn't just for shooters. When we talk about survival stress, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about, again, whether it's a knockdown, drag-out fight where somebody's just trying to punch you or kick you or bite you or whatever. It could involve hand-to-hand skills. It could involve, how many people have you and I met over the years, Ian, that carried pepper spray and they thought a can of pepper spray was going to keep them alive, just like people think a pocket knife's going to keep me alive or my gun's going to keep me alive, when they have no experience and no anticipation or concept of actually using those things in a real fight. So what I want to address is this is not just for shooters. It is for martial artists. This includes driving under stress. This is the same lecture I would give people that EVO, emergency vehicle operation, for a living, be they an armored car driver, be they a cop, be they a paramedic or a firefighter, anyone who's operating a vehicle in a stressful environment. And that includes literally every human being that's going to watch the program. You could be driving along and the next thing you know, without even knowing it, you could have pissed somebody off in some road rage incident, and now you got to drive like your life depends on it. That doesn't mean I'm going to turn you into Mario Andretti. It just means I'm going to teach you how to recognize the symptoms of survival stress and how to, if as much as possible, mediate those symptoms, how to, if possible, eliminate survival stress from overcoming you. Again, these are things that we can do in a lecture format. I'm going to have a lot of recommended reading. As I'm doing my 3-part series, I'm going to tell you, the student, books that you need to read. And yeah, I can highlight them for you, but you need to buy those books. If you're serious enough to buy into, literally pay your hard-earned money to watch this series, then what I'm going to tell you is it can't be done in a 3-part series. you've got to move forward. We're not in my library right now, but I've got hundreds of books that I've been reading since 1985 when I first met Mr. Siddle. And I'm telling you, I'm easily a couple of grand in the books. A couple of the books that I bought have been well over $100 because they're technical books on understanding the brain and body function and what have you. So I'm going to have a recommended series of books and articles that you read. Some of the stuff you can look up online for free and it won't cost you a penny, but it all centers around human performance under stress. And that's what you have to understand. It's not the how-to from the perspective of using a pocket knife, a gun, a can of pepper spray, or your fists. It's about training your brain to be ready for the danger when it's there, not to let the danger overwhelm you, and, for example, activate your sympathetic nervous system. We don't want that to happen if we can avoid it at all. But if it does occur, we want to keep that activation at a mild level instead of a maximum discharge level, and we want you to perform to the best of your ability under stress.
And a lot of times just knowing how to think under stress makes a really big difference. And I was hit last summer when I was making a left-hand turn into a class that I was about to train in, and working for the medical examiner for many years. I've been to countless fatal auto accidents. And as usually if they're fatal off of the expressway, it's because of a head-on collision when a car crosses over into opposing traffic. So as I'm waiting to make this left-hand turn, I'm always watching for the car behind me, because unfortunately with a job like that, you do get hit a lot of bad areas you work in, a lot of drunk drivers and things like that. And I'm watching and I see this car behind me and I see they're not going to stop in time. I hit the gas. And if it wasn't for hitting that gas, the impact would have been a lot worse. But more so than that, I was also anticipating them sending me into oncoming traffic, which is exactly what happened. And because I was already ready for it and I knew what to do, I immediately turned away from the car that was coming right at me. They had to swerve too. That's how close I came to hit them. And as a result, although my car was damaged, there was no physical any injuries. And it was a very mild outcome compared to what it could have been. And that's all about knowing what to anticipate and how to think under stress. And of course, in that moment, I mentioned that things didn't slow down. It just seemed like I had a lot of time to respond to everything, even though obviously everything just happened like that, right? And that's all about how your brain adapts to what's going on and things that you're going to talk about in your program, things that can affect people if they find themselves looking at a gun being pointed at them or being shot at or being stabbed or being hit, and then have to suddenly react in that moment. And I find when people freeze a lot, it's because they don't know what to do and they're overwhelmed. And just teaching people how to think about those situations and be prepared can be the difference between freezing or responding in a way that's effective. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, because you and I are trainers and we could talk about this stuff forever. But I know it's not just a safety point of view. It's also from a legal point of view, both on the civil side and on the criminal side. And there have been court cases that have very clearly stated that you have to train in a way that reflects reality, or you are going to put yourself in harm's way from a criminal and liability point of view. And that these are cases that affect law enforcement officers, but they can have a direct result on private security. They can have a direct result on private citizens. And there are all things that we need to be aware of in our own personal preparation, whether we're a martial arts school or whether we're learning how to use guns in self-defense. Can you talk a little bit about from the civil side and from the criminal side after the fact, when people are protecting their freedom and their assets?
Yeah, so, with cases like Graham versus Connor, in any of the law enforcement trainers that are listening right now or viewing this video, they'll know what Graham versus Connor is. It's the premier case. But, one of the big cases that most trainers miss is Zuckel versus Denver. And Zuckel versus Denver, basically the Supreme Court said that realistic training is mandatory. You could meet all the requirements of your state and local organizations, but if you aren't doing realistic training, and they even said that video simulators are not sufficient enough to qualify for this. They said force on force training with live stress inoculation, not a TV screen or a video screen, but live stress inoculation is mandatory because inducing that stress is what makes them realize that they will make bad decisions under stress if they have not done stress inoculation training. And in that case, basically an officer shot a man who turned on him on a bright sunny day, and he saw a glint of light. He was told the subject might be armed, so he drew and fired on the subject, and it turned out that all he had in his hand was a nail clipper. So for both criminal liability, we don't want anybody to go to jail. We want them to justifiably use the proper level of, and by proper I mean acceptable level of force, to defend themselves, a loved one, or an innocent person. And depending on what state you live in and how your laws are written, you could still face civil litigation. Of course, for my law enforcement brothers and sisters paying attention to this video, we know that that can happen anytime. In some states, there's more immunity for civilians if they properly use force, any level of force, up to and including deadly force. But in some states, they have no civil liability protection at all. Just like a law enforcement officer, they could do everything right and still be open for litigation. So they've got to be trained to, as I said earlier, not overreact and use too much force, or underreact and use too little force where another innocent person gets injured or killed, including potentially themselves. It's a fine line you walk, and part of that is some of the information that we're going to talk about in this 3-part series is going to cover what a lot of litigation attorneys are now using against people in court. So they need, as the student, to understand human factors research and human factors science, if you will, human performance under survival stress circumstances, just to reduce their own liability, again, so that they don't over or underreact.
You know, I've with your experience in the field in law enforcement and also your work as a subject expert, a lot of your experiences, what people have done right and what people have done wrong, are going to be an integral part of this training. And it's a real world experience that's really going to open people's eyes to what they need to know when they're making those split-second decisions. All stuff we got to think about ahead of time, so when we're in the moment, we understand the decisions that we're making. And Joe, again, we could talk forever on this stuff because we're both very passionate about this stuff, but I kind of want to wrap it up now because I just want to give people an overview of the type of training that you're going to offer, that real world perspective, that gap between the training environment and the real environment, what we need to do to cross that gap so that we're not only in the best position to protect our safety and the safety of other innocent people, but so that we're also, while we're protecting our safety, protecting our freedom and our assets. And I think that holistic approach is really critical. And it is, generally speaking, a matter of common sense, but only if we take time to understand the decisions that we're making before we have to make them. And only if we understand how to be mentally prepared to make those decisions under those dynamic conditions where things are happening fast and when there's a lot of stress involved. So, sir, how is it that you would like to wrap this up, give people maybe one last final image about what's going to take place in your class, why it's so critical for them, whether they're martial artists, whether they're in private security, whether they're in law enforcement or the military, or anybody who wants to protect their safety and the safety of their loved ones?
So basically 3 parts. We're going to look at 3 separate concepts. One, the first thing we're going to do is define survival stress. We're going to define what human factor science is and what we know about human performance at this time. In part 2, we will get into explicit detail about those definitions. We will talk about human performance under stress and how the brain and body are affected. And then in part 3, we're going to give solutions, some possible answers, because again, every human being is different. We're going to look at some both, if you will, psychological skill development, mental emotional training that can improve your performance under stress. And we'll look at some aspects of motor skill performance too. We'll look at physical skills, and we'll talk about the concept like less is best. Or how to reduce your techniques, whatever you're using, whether you're punching, kicking, pocket knife, pepper spray, or a firearm, reducing your techniques down to their core values, their most important components, and eliminating any unnecessary fluff or wasted movement, which means wasted time, which means a deterioration of performance. especially when you're on the negative end of this. If you're the average citizen who turns around from that ATM with $20 in their hand and there's some mental mutant there with a machete, there's 3 M's for you, with a machete saying, give me all your money, I'm going to kill you. You have to refine your mental and physical performance to keep yourself alive. So.
And, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but you've been around for a long time, and you did one of the earliest studies on Hick's law and how that affects response time. I'm going to hold you to bring that up in the class because it's a really interesting story. And what you found is fascinating. But I'm going to mention this too, just so people don't think we're talking about theory. The national average, police hitting real bad guys in real gunfights, is relatively low. That means the majority of the time, bullets are going into the public, not into the bad guys. However, there was a shooting at your department with somebody that you trained where they were able to hit the suspect 12 times in 2 seconds with 100% hits. Now, that's not a guarantee, of course, but that does go to show that when training is properly structured, the life and death difference it can make, well, it's a life and death difference, and it's not theory, it's reality, and it's based on a lot of real world experience. And that's a level of experience that we want to bring to people that are going to participate in this class. Joel, thank you very much for your service. You've not only served your community for many decades on the front lines of law enforcement, but you've also served, I don't know how many people as a trainer, both in the law enforcement community and training people in the public. And I know you saved lives on both ends of that. And your entire life is a dedication to service. And I really commend that, and I appreciate that. I'm so grateful that I have you as a teacher, because like you often hear me talk about Luke Kyoto, another one of the few people I call teacher. It's because of your influence on me that I'm better able to help people, and helping people is my calling. So I simply couldn't be more grateful. So thank you very much for your service, sir. I'm really looking forward to bringing this workshop out to people. And I hope everybody watching this, look at the show notes for details. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for your time, and stay safe.